So that's embrace the gospel. The second category is apply spiritual disciplines. Eager conversationalists are people who not only say faith is very important to their everyday lives, but they actively seek to grow their faith through prayer, reading the Bible, and attending worship regularly. We're going to talk about a few different spiritual disciplines. By no means is the list I'm going to present right now going to be exhaustive. The list of spiritual disciplines that you could grow in is pretty long. We're specifically looking at the ones that I can look at research and say there's a correlation between that spiritual discipline and you talking about your faith. That we have research that says there's some kind of a relationship going on here. This is not a value judgment on others. You want to grow in those? I think great. What's fascinating to me about the ones that come up here that we're going to go through in a moment is that they're all ones that when I talk to people, they all know they should be doing. They're the basics. You see them listed right here, like prayer, reading the Bible, attending worship regularly. Well, of course I should be doing those things. We all know it. We all give lip service. But when someone's talking to me one-on-one privately, almost always people bring these things up and say, I know I should be doing this, but I'm really not. And there's this weird sense of shame. And so I think there's a bit of a disconnect in American Christian culture between this basic thing that we know will grow our relationship with God and the actual doing of it. In particular, a couple things to jump out here. Now, what's really interesting to me is that both eager and reluctant conversationalists are pretty likely to spend at least some time in prayer. There is a statistically significant a percentage break for the eager conversationalists, but we're still looking at like spending time in prayer, especially if you have that as a real broad thing. Have you prayed at all in the last week? Yeah, you're pretty likely to do that as a Christian. Reading the Bible, attended a church worship service, these things become significantly less likely. In particular, once again, there are 5 things that we see a correlation between. The first one, I attend corporate worship weekly. And that word weekly is really the one that jumps out these days. Most churches, most denominations, most statistics, when they talk about regular church attendance, no longer mean weekly. The number for regular worship attendance is usually not 4 times a month. It's become 2 times a month. And that's changed in my lifetime. I remember in college and just post-college, when we would talk about it, we'd be like 3 times a month. And they were bemoaning the fact that we could no longer say 4 times a month because, well, just people weren't doing it enough. And now, when I look at statistics and I talk to churches and I talk to people who measure these things, they measure regular worship attendance based on 2 times a month. Well, when you're not engaged with the body of Christ, you're not forced to have a spiritual conversation at least once a week with somebody. When you go to church, you're significantly more likely to have a spiritual conversation. I say more likely. I do know there are people in our congregations who walk into a church and have talked to nobody, leave the service and talk to nobody, who are isolated and lonely in the congregation. There was this period of time in my life when I first moved to Chicago where I was one of those people. Where on a Sunday, if my roommate, who was a non-Christian, wasn't around, and I went to church, I could spend the whole day not talking to anybody. And the one place you'd think I definitely would be at a church service. Now that's changed. I'm in a very different place in my own life and in my family and in the church I'm a part of now. I'm very invested in it. So if I go to church, I'm definitely going to be having some kind of spiritual conversation. For most people, I think if you're at corporate worship weekly, you're probably going to be having a spiritual conversation. It just kind of makes sense. The second one, I read the Bible devotionally at least once a week. Are you opening the scriptures? Are you hearing from God, the Word of God? When you do that, it starts to spark things. Sometimes you get inspired by something and are like, wow, this is so exciting. Did you know this text? And you have a conversation with someone in your household or maybe somebody else. Sometimes it makes you mad. God, what are you doing here? I don't like what you have to say on this day. And it sparks a conversation. Sometimes it's just the food you need to get through life. I maintain a regular personal prayer life. Those people who are in prayer are more likely to be talking about their faith. I have other Christians in my life that I do everyday activities with, and I know well. Remember, we've been talking about spiritual conversations is this really broad thing, not just evangelism, but the people in your life who are of the faith, who share the same faith with you. If you don't have Christians in your life on a daily basis, then you're less likely to talk about your faith. And that just kind of makes sense. If you know you've got someone who's your prayer partner, who's there with you, who you go to worship with, and you're struggling with something, you're much more likely to say, hey, John, can you pray with me about this thing? That time in my life when I lived in Chicago and I could go through a Sunday, I didn't have any Christian friends. I didn't do life with other Christians at all. And so did I have spiritual conversations with people? Actually, yes. My temperament is of a kind that I talked about faith and what people think and what people believe anyway. But it was really me initiating those conversations. It wasn't a natural thing. And I wasn't necessarily being supported through it. I didn't have Christians in my life. And then the last thing here, my faith is a part of my everyday thought, word, and deed. You know, I don't want to spend too much time talking about reluctant conversationalists, the other category, but there were two main reasons why people said they were reluctant. One was, there was a lot of little things, but they kind of all fed up into two big ones. One was that they were afraid of giving offense by talking about their faith. The fear of offense is a reason why people don't talk about the faith. And that plays itself out in a lot of different ways. The other was they didn't see it as being relevant to their everyday thought, word, and deed. You know, okay, Jesus died, he rose again, my sins are forgiven, great, but I have to worry about the laundry. I have to worry about what we're going to put on the dinner table today. It doesn't actually have a practical everyday impact on the way I live my life. It's this other thing that I have to deal with at funerals and maybe one day when I die too. Well, if that's the way you see faith, then it kind of makes sense you don't talk about it all the time. But when one of your spiritual disciplines is living your life in such a way where you see the impact of God in everyday thought, life, and deed, then it's going to become this natural thing. Well, of course I have to talk about it. And actually you start to think, well, maybe all these little things that I take for granted do have some kind of impact on who I am for God and who God is with me. All right, once again, before I move on from Apply Spiritual Disciplines, I want you to do the same thing. Go ahead and change a number. Go ahead and circle one that you want to know more about, that you have questions about. Is there one of these things that when you look at yourself, you think, you know, if I'm going to be real honest with myself, I know that's important, but I don't do it? Make some kind of note to yourself there. The third category is grasp the calling. Eager conversationalists are people who know they are part of the priesthood of all believers. They accept a personal responsibility to share their faith with other people. And by other people, I mean both non-Christians and actually Christians, that your faith is not just something for evangelistic moments, but it is a part of who you are and how you live your life and how you see things. And you have a responsibility to talk about it. That you're grasping that calling to do so. Now, we had a really interesting opportunity with this Barna study because it turns out that Spiritual Conversations in the Digital Age is not our first partnership with Barna. Back in 1993, we did a study with Barna, and we were able to take a look at, in particular, evangelism trends going on. So this gave us the chance to kind of compare with some pretty much the same questions and say, how have things changed in 25 years? And it turns out, when it comes to grasping your personal calling, things have changed a lot. I think anecdotally, a lot of us know this, that people are more reluctant to talk about their faith. But now we have hard data that lets us know this. And it actually starts with, philosophically, whose responsibility is it to do this? In 1993, and in 2018, we asked the question, converting people to Christianity is the job of the local church. Do you agree, don't know, or disagree? Notice that in 1993, 86% of people disagreed with that statement. They said it's not the job of the church. And the follow-up data told us really clearly it was because it was the individual person's job. It's Don's job. It's Jim's job. It's Susie's job. It's Megan's job. It's not the church's job. And that's why 86% of people in 1993 disagree with that. Compare that to today, to 2018. 47% disagree. 29% agree now. Oh yeah, no, that's something the church worries about. I don't have to worry about it individually. And 24%, they don't have any idea. The culture's shifting. And as we looked at the data, this just became clearer and clearer. Every Christian has a responsibility to share the faith. In 1993, 89% said, oh yeah, no, you have a responsibility to share your faith. That's just part of what it means to be a Christian. In 2018, only 64% did. Now, difference between responsibility and I'm willing to do it. The willingness we've seen has gone way, way down, but it turns out even understanding that Christians are called to do this thing is going down. And then as we look, is it any wonder then that the statistics of people who feel like they are prepared to do this is going down? If the value for it is going down, well then of course the training and people feeling like the church is actually teaching me how to talk about my faith is going down as well. In particular, for those who actually do grasp the calling, we had 5 things, once again, that kind of correlate and go along. The first is, I believe God has called Christians to spread the good news. So if you read Scripture and you believe that, and when you heard me going through the narrative of the Old and New Testament and talking about your faith, and when you read Acts and see this is not just for the apostles, but we as Christians are called to share the faith, when you feel you have that responsibility, well, of course, if you feel a responsibility, you're going to be more likely to have a conversation. The second, I recognize the impact of spiritual conversations in other people's lives. Do you think it even matters? I've talked to so many people who say, well, I had a spiritual conversation with my friend who was not a Christian, and I didn't see anything come of it, so why even try? But I've talked to so many other people who said, I'm only in the church today because God used all these different people at different times in my life to come and have a personal conversation with me. I've talked to so many people who kind of share their story, and they're sharing different people God's used. And I realize, wow, just because I don't get to see all of the impact doesn't mean that conversation is not having an impact. I feel personal responsibility to share my faith with others. I rely on God in order to share the gospel. And then here we have, I see sharing the gospel as one way I can serve other people. There's this trend in evangelism training that I hear a lot, and I'm not actually saying it's necessarily bad, where people will say, you know what, I don't share my faith, I do it by the way I live. People can say I'm a Christian by the way I live. That's my evangelism. That's my way of sharing the faith. So if I serve other people, that is my way of showing God's love and doing evangelism. Well, okay, but what if we flip that on its end? Do you ever take a moment to realize that if we're talking about life and death, heaven and hell, eternity, that if you share your faith, you're serving them? That is actually legitimately a way of serving someone you love? If you see it that way, well, you're probably going to be more likely to talk about your faith. All right, I know this is getting a little repetitive, but we're going to do it anyway. Before I move on, take a moment to look at those and evaluate yourself. Are you going to change your number on any one of these things? Is there one that you feel particularly strongly about? Is there one that you're like, I don't even know how to get closer and get stronger in that or what that means? Circle it. Make some kind of mark. I guess it doesn't have to be a circle. You can make an asterisk, a star, a dotted line, a dash. I'm not going to look. All right, so now we move on to our second E. Expect spiritual conversations. While some actively seek opportunities to share, many spiritual conversations happen unexpectedly. Eager conversationalists are people who are ready and willing to participate when those conversations happen. So if you're the sort of person who expects spiritual conversations to happen, then it's just natural that you're going to be the sort of person who has them. You're looking for them. Eager conversationalists, you can see here, 27% of eager conversationalists say they actively seek opportunities. 55%, this is kind of interesting, says that eager conversationalists happen unexpectedly. It's the reluctant conversationalist who comes out ahead. Why might that be? Because the eager conversationalist is expecting it to happen. They're looking for those opportunities. It doesn't take them by surprise. The reluctant conversationalist is the one who's saying, oh, golly gee gumbucks, I hope nobody asks me about the faith because I don't know what I'm going to say about it right now. And, oh, wow, you've always seemed like a non-Christian, and now you're asking me a real personal faith question. What do I do with that in this moment? I'm completely surprised by it. Eager conversationalists expect it to happen. And so while sometimes it does happen unexpectedly, that person you weren't thinking was going to ask you something, you're less likely to be surprised by it. In particular, 5 things. 1, I notice spiritual conversations happen in everyday life. 2, I look for opportunities to share my faith. 3, I invest time and energy in talking about faith. 4, I look for the unexpected conversation in everyday life. And 5, I try to share my faith by the way that I live. So there is a place for that. The way you live, impacting the way you share your faith, recognizing that the way you live is a witness to the people around you. I don't mean to dismiss that at all. When I look at this category, I think about it a lot like when I meet a new person. So, and there's someone in the audience who I'm looking at right now, Chris. I've known Chris on some level for years, and I met him first when he was a student at the seminary. But it turned out I had actually been in circles around Chris for a long time, and I had no idea. And I remember this moment where a friend of mine, Tony Cook, introduced us in the hall at Seek Hall. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember sitting there, and I remember being like, oh yeah, no, I've never met this person at all. Okay, you're Chris. And then I remember realizing I see him absolutely everywhere, that we're in similar church circles, and we keep going to the same events. And the moment my brain was attuned to, oh, this is Chris, and I know to look for him, all of a sudden, boom, 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 he's popping out. Before that, he was just a face in the crowd. It turns out that spiritual conversations are a lot like that. If you expect them to happen, if you're looking for them to happen, you see there's fertile ground for them everywhere. That all the time people are bringing things up. I'm looking around. I'm privileged to be in a room full of people who I think get this well, and I'm looking at you right now, Susie. I know from our conversations that you get this, that Susie will work with people who might seem the farthest from being willing to have a conversation, but they just want to talk to somebody. And as Susie's in those conversations, she knows, oh, well, we're going to be having a conversation about faith real quick now. Why? You might not see it yet, but I see it. I see that God has put something down in front of us, and Susie's looking for it, so she grabs it and runs through that door. Eager conversationalists are people who expect them to happen. We live in a world where we seem surprisingly protected from tragedy compared to 500 years ago, but we're not. Every time we turn on the news, we're seeing something else horrible that's happened. Maybe it's a shooting or a hurricane or flooding. It could be any number of things. We're talking to somebody, right before walking in here, I was talking to somebody who was going to their grandfather's funeral. How can those things not be an opportunity for a spiritual conversation? They're happening every day. Okay, one more time. Which is the one? Circle it. Make a note. One more category for us to talk about. Eager conversationalists are people who respond confidently. Eager conversationalists are people who feel qualified to share their faith and are glad when they do. They feel peace and joy. They laugh. They aren't afraid, even though they know these conversations sometimes are difficult. Eager conversations versus reluctant. I feel qualified to share my faith, one of the questions we asked in our Barna research. Eager conversationalists, definitely. 65% said definitely. 31% said, well, maybe qualified. And only 4% said, no, I just don't feel ready for this at all. If you are feeling qualified, you're just more likely to take a jump into the water, no matter how deep it might seem, because you know you'll be able to get out again. Reluctant conversationalists, only 40% feel qualified. 40%, a bigger part, are saying, well, maybe, and a much bigger group, 20 to 4%, are saying, no, I can't do this. I can't handle this. I'm not ready to do it. So, of course, they don't take a try. Of course, they don't do that. Once again, we have some things that have correlated with people who respond confidently and are going to be more eager. I invest time and energy into preparing for spiritual conversations. That one just seems natural. If you actually take the time and energy to say, I'm going to try to learn more about this, which actually our next workshop that's going to be done by Don Everett is a great opportunity for you to do just that today. The second one, I try to understand others. And the third one, I naturally adapt my responses to someone in a conversation based on where they are on their spiritual journey. I think these two are really, really critical. Are you willing to take the time to understand other people's perspectives? You know, for some of us in the church, something weird has happened where we've been afraid to listen to other people. We've had this fear of, if I do, I'm somehow inherently agreeing with what they think. Really? I live in St. Louis, and this is going to get me into some serious trouble, but I can't stand Emo's Pizza. But I talk to people who grew up in St. Louis all the time, and Emo's is this thing that they think is the best thing ever, and I don't understand it. And I will listen to you tell me why you like it. I think you're inherently wrong, but I will listen to you, and I don't feel threatened in my belief about Emo's Pizza in the least, because I've tried it. Why in this area do we think listening to someone else's perspective is suddenly going to make us lose our faith or something? No. Listen to where people are coming from. Understand them. Care about them. And from that, you'll have a better understanding of where their hurt is and where the gospel is seeking to meet them on their spiritual journey. You're already wherever you are. In this conversation, you're with them. People who can do this and people who invest time in this feel more comfortable and feel more confident in their response because they know their response is based on the person they're talking to and not just something from a book they read once. I am patient with others during spiritual conversations and endure through the awkward moments. It's going to be awkward sometimes. And our gut is to say, well, because it's awkward, I'm going to run away from it. People don't like it. If it's awkward, I've offended. Well, this is what's really interesting to me. It turns out, when we did the research, we asked the general population, not just Christians, but non-Christians, how did you feel about your last spiritual conversation? And the overwhelming responses were positive. I laughed in it. I enjoyed it. I'd like to have another one. I felt good about that spiritual conversation, regardless of whether or not you agreed with the person. One of the reasons people give for being reluctant is a fear of offense, and it turns out it's the boogeyman. It's not really there. Oh, sure, there are times and places. I don't mean to say they're not. But most of us in America can have a spiritual conversation, can endure through that awkwardness, and if we're respectful, regardless of where we're coming from, we're glad we had it. We don't necessarily have to be afraid of that thing. As a matter of fact, this fifth one, I experienced positive benefits from spiritual conversations. I was on a plane recently and I saw the Mr. Rogers documentary. Anybody seen that? It was great. I cried like a baby. I was like, everyone thinks I'm weird, but it was just really great. And one of the parts of the Mr. Rogers documentary that really grabbed me was someone was talking about his interview technique and that he was okay with awkward and that the best interviews came when he just waited. So he would ask a question And someone would give him an answer, and he would just lovingly smile back. And there'd be a period of silence. And they talked to a number of people he interviewed, and they all said to a T. And I thought, oh, I guess he wants me to say more. And they did. And what the people who made the show said was, all the best stuff came then, when he just was willing to patiently wait through that awkward period. Eager conversationalists are people who respond confidently. And part of that means you know how to talk about the gospel. Part of that means you know how to listen to other people. You know how to respect and love them where they're at. And that you know how to just kind of sit in that experience with them for as long as it takes. That was the last one, and I want you to circle one last time. Change a number if you need to. Circle one that you're like, boy, I'd like to know more about that area. If I was going to sum up what we've learned about eager conversationalists into kind of just one quick pithy sentence, I would say this. People who think about God are people who talk about God. And people who talk about God then end up thinking about God, and they become people who talk about God. It's this wonderful cycle that gets going. It seems really obvious, but as a professor of mine used to like to say, things that go without saying still need to be said in order to go without saying. Well, people who think about God are people who talk about God. And so the question for us is maybe, how can we, no matter where we are in this spectrum between reluctant and eager, how can we think about God and talk about him more often? How can we grow in that? And for the rest of our time together, that's what I want us to focus in on today. And the first step of this is going to be to make a plan. And in order to make a plan into becoming a more eager conversationalist from wherever you are, you need to start by just choosing an area. Of that EAGER, I want you to choose an area that you think, I am willing to grow in this. And I chose that word willing on purpose. There's no point in choosing one that you think, I know I should, but I'm just not ready to tackle this yet. Okay, I get that. You are where you are in your journey. I'm willing to grow in this. As I went through all this stuff, I know it's been a lot, I've asked you to kind of make some marks, adjust some numbers. And now is your chance to kind of look at those. So here's some things to think about. What's an area where you think, I'm low in this? What's an area where you think, I'm strong in this and I want to grow in it more? What's an area you think, I'm just really curious about this? What's one you're willing to commit to? I'm going to give you just a quick moment. I want you to write it down on your paper. Pick a specific activity. We'll do that in a second. Don't worry about that quite yet. Choose that area. The second thing that we want to do is pick a specific activity that will help us grow in that area. Well, how in the world are we going to do that? Excellent question. There's a number of ways we can do that. There's a number of activities that you can do. As a matter of fact, we here at Lutheran Hour Ministries have developed a course called Eager to Share. And in that course, the last session of it, it's a free online course that you can go and take at any time. We've gone through most of the material at this point. If you want to just skip to the last session to get to this resource, feel free to do so. But in it, it walks you through making a plan. And the way we've gone through things is we've realized that for any one of these areas, there's really kind of three different types of activities you might want to choose. The first one are what we call first steps. So a first step would be, I've never done this before, I'm kind of scared, but I'm ready and willing to take my first step into reading the Bible more often, attending church more regularly, seeing myself as a child of God, whatever it is. Then there are people who say, you know what, I've done that first step, but I feel kind of stalled, and I know I need to grow further in this. That would be your next step option. So a next step option would be, I'm willing, I've been starting to read the Bible, but I have no regular plan or rhyme or reason. and I need some helps in understanding what I'm reading. What would be something that would kind of push me a little further? And then finally, there are those of us who say, I've been doing this my whole life, but I know I want to take it to the next level. Maybe it's to continue with this idea of reading the Bible regularly. Maybe it's you want to learn how to talk to others and encourage others how to do it. Maybe you're just ready to get even deeper than you ever have before. We call that out-of-the-box steps, taking a chance to do something just completely different. So if you go to that page, that course, Eager to Share, one of our Learn courses, you can find a list of, for every one of these things, EAGER, different ideas that are first steps, next steps, and out-of-the-box steps. And you can take a look at those. And we have a number of resources we'll point you to. A number of them are free. Many of them are from us, but not all of them. They're resources that we've seen that are good and will help you in this. You can also talk to your pastor. Talk to someone you trust. If you know someone who is strong in this area, set up a time to go and get coffee with them, to sit down with them, have a conversation, and say, I want to tackle this thing. I did this presentation a few months ago for a group of Christians, and there was one particular person who I thought, this person's strong in all of these. And the first thing they did when the session was over is they found me and said, listen, you hit on the one that I always hide. And I don't even know where to start. I feel ignorant and I feel like an idiot about this thing. Will you meet with me? And so we've been meeting and developing a plan that fits. So if you know someone who is strong in that area, go to them, talk to them, be honest, say, hey, listen, I need some help figuring this thing out. Now, we have an advantage here today because you're all in this room. So we're going to start this process. You might have to adjust it a little afterwards, and I'll be available, and some others will be available to help you do that. But I want to start this today, right now. And what I want to do is just collaboratively list some ideas for each other. Start to brainstorm the list. Start to get it going. So once you've taken a look at the different first steps, next steps, or out-of-the-box steps, once you've maybe sought some counsel from a good close friend or a pastor, you want to actually commit yourself to choosing an activity that you think will help you grow. Now, this is not for the rest of your life. This is something, it's a step. It's a way you're going to go. And as you go down that path, you may say, you know what, this wasn't quite the right step, so you'll adjust it. But now you're intentionally making choices and growing towards becoming a more eager conversationalist. But of course, choosing the activity isn't enough, is it? Because how many times have we chosen to do something and never actually done it? So the next thing you want to do is you want to set a time frame. When will I have done this thing by? Now, the moment you realize that, it's going to affect the activity you choose, right? Because if you said, well, I am going to memorize the entire Bible, well, that wasn't really realistic. You're not going to get the whole Bible memorized, and definitely not in the next month. So if you say, I'm going to pick something, an activity that I'm going to do for the rest of my life, well, that's kind of an unrealistic time frame. I want you to have something that you can measure. Yes, I'm actually working in this direction right now. So the next step is going to be set a time frame. By next month, I will have. Starting Monday and every Monday following for the next 6 months, during the season of Lent, whatever it might be. And then the fourth thing is, I want you to write the name of someone you can ask to help you. So often, we find areas in our life where we want to grow. Maybe we think they're weaknesses, maybe we think they're strengths, maybe they're just something we've always aspired to. I want to learn how to tap dance. Everyone always kind of laughs at me at that, but I really do want to learn how to tap dance. But I've never actually gotten someone to commit me to going to classes and started the process of doing it. And until I do that, I will never learn to tap dance. Who can go on this journey with you? Who can help you? It's a little bit about accountability, but it's also about just supporting you. And it can be anyone you feel safe enough to share this with. A close friend, a sibling, a spouse, a parent. Who's that person who's going to go on this journey with you? Write that person's name down. And then finally, write it out loud as a goal. in order to grow as an eager conversationalist and better, boom, the eager characteristic, with God's help, I plan to, what activity? Over the next time frame, with the help from accountability person. Put all that down into a statement and then share it with that person. You don't have to share it with me. You don't have to share it with your spouse, but whoever that person is who you think can help you in this journey to become more eager, share it with that person. So this is the eager profile. We've learned that eager conversationalists are significantly more likely to talk about their faith all the time with their loved ones and with those who do not know the faith, those who they might want to know the faith, who could be one of their loved ones. The last step here, respond confidently, by the time you start to grow and eager, is maybe the one that's most often jumps out at us, that says, how do I respond? How do I share my faith? I know we broke up into groups here earlier, and there were a number of people who were going, I need to do this one better. How do I do it? Well, we've learned a lot from our research with Barna. And so the next workshop, the next presentation is going to zero in on that, on how to respond. And we have something we call the spiritual conversation curve, which is a way of looking at the conversations you're having with, in particular, non-believers, and figuring out, what is the right type of conversation for me to have in this particular scenario? Now, as you go through all of this, we do have a number of resources here at Lutheran Hour Ministries that I encourage you to take a closer look at. One of which that I'm really excited about is this book by, he's the host of our next workshop, Don Everett's. It's called The Reluctant Witness, Discovering the Delight of Spiritual Conversations. I am really excited about this book, and I encourage you to take a look at it. I got a chance to read it as he was working on it, and I have to say it's one of the best books I've read in a long time. We also have a number of courses on our free Bible study courses on LHM Learn. Go to lhm.org/learn, and you can learn more about what it means to be eager to share, prepared to respond, and a number of other topics that will help you grow both in becoming more eager and in actually engaging those people with the gospel when you want to. As always, feel free to contact us at Lutheran Hour Ministries with your questions. We are here to bring Christ to the nations and the nations to the church. And we do that by equipping people to share the gospel and also directly engaging. And we want to partner with you on that journey. Thank you.